Today I'm in the parliamentary office of George Galloway MP, who around 3 months ago won a surprise election victory in his constituency of Bradford West. George Galloway, thanks very much for talking to us today. Now, your election, your victory, was a surprise to many, possibly not to you. What does it take to break a monopoly of these three ruling parties to win an election in British politics?
It's an Everest of a challenge because, first of all, the big parties command almost all of the media attention, and the media is the medium through which most people get their political ideas and news. And secondly, because you usually lack a critical credibility factor. People are doubtful that they would be doing other than throwing their vote away by voting for a candidate who may be closer to their cup of tea, but are unlikely to win it, and therefore the voter is in a way taking a self-denying ordinance in the choosing of the MP. But if you have this critical mass of derision, I mean, I don't think that's too strong a word, the derision felt in the country against the three mainstream parties. As I often say, if a backside could have three cheeks, these three parties are those three cheeks. The three mainstream parties are such that you couldn't slip a cigarette paper between them. They all accept that austerity is the medicine. Some quibble about the dosage and the timetable of the taking of the medicine, but they all accept that the mass of the people must pay the price for the crimes and the mistakes of rich and powerful people. Secondly, all of them support Britain's role in going around the world, invading other people's countries, occupying them, and expending billions, in some cases hundreds of billions of hard-earned money that the people have sweated for on weapons and war. And so if you can come along and say, we don't believe that ordinary people should pay the price for this crisis, and we don't believe Britain should be occupying other people's countries, first in the ranks of those pushing for a new invasion, a new occupation, as Mr. Hague is doing over Syria, for example, at the moment. We just reject that. Our paradigm is completely different. And it's like in the wonderful film Dead Poets Society, when the teacher invites the children to stand on the desk and see how different everything looks. Once you get people standing up on those desks, they can see that actually the world looks very different from up there.
And do you think that there's a wider disconnect between politics and the electorate, the people?
Yes, people hold the mainstream politicians in contempt. They know that the mainstream politicians, hundreds of them, many hundreds of them, almost all of them, were looting the people's pockets in parliamentary expenses, which was a huge scandal. We have actually systemic failure in Britain. The media is on trial. The bankers are on trial. The politicians have been put on trial and found guilty long ago. So I, who was untouched by the expenses scandal, didn't claim any expenses at all, and who has a track record of attacking the billionaire mogul ownership of the media, and is seen as an anti-political voice in the sense of being anti the political system. Bingo, we won the jackpot.
You've said in the past that Muslims like you because you protect them from Islamophobia. We recently heard the director of MI5 say that Al-Qaeda is using Arab Spring nations to recruit terrorists and potentially target Britain. Is there a point to Islamophobia, therefore? Do people have, are people justified in their fear of Islam, if you like?
No, like any phobia, it is irrational, exaggerated, and paranoid. But that's not to say that Islamic extremism does not exist. Of course it exists, and it exists in Britain, and it gets more and more oxygen as a result of the policies that the British government follows. You can't make endless war against Muslims and Muslim countries abroad and expect to have no resonance here at home. But actually we are the antidote to Islamist extremism, because we say to the young Muslims, you are right to be angry, but be angry with others who are not Muslims in democratic politics, so that you can affect change rather than blowing yourself and other people up and in these kind of terrible acts of self-immolation that we saw on 7/7 5 years ago here, almost to the day. So the truth is, Al-Qaeda exists. It was invented by the countries now most concerned about it. It was invented on the principle, bankrupt moral principle, that my enemy's enemy is my friend. The Soviet Union was the enemy of the West, so they gave weapons and money and credibility to an Islamist fanatic formation, and they didn't read the novel Frankenstein to the end. If they had, they would have known that when you make a monster, it ultimately breaks free of your control. So they've no one to blame but themselves for this phenomenon of Islamist extremism. It comes out of a swamp of hatred sown by Western countries in their policies towards the Muslim countries. Therefore, the best way to solve this problem is to drain this swamp of hatred and bitterness by doing the reverse of what we did to fill it.
There is a rise in Islamist political parties, though, isn't there, particularly in Arab Spring nations, in the Middle East and North Africa. What challenges do you think that poses for Syria at the moment?
Well, a very large number of people in Syria, whether a majority or not, I don't know, are terrified of the prospects of victory for the Syrian rebels, because there's a substantial Christian population in Syria, for example, which has the most honoured position of any Christian group anywhere in the Middle East, including Israel, by the way. There are minority Islamic sects which are substantial in number but a minority in the state as a whole. There are different ethnic groups. Kurdish people, for example, are terrified of the victory of a jihadist, extremist Islamic victory. So that's undoubtedly one of the reasons why the Syrian government is still holding on in the teeth of what is a thoroughgoing and massive international conspiracy against them. Not because they're a dictatorship, because the West likes dictatorships in the Arab world. Saudi Arabia is the grimmest dictatorship of them all and is the best friend of the West. Not because it's a one family rule, because of course all these Arab dictatorships are one family rule, and in Saudi Arabia the family has even given its name to the country. Even Kim Jong-il didn't do that. So it's not because of dislike of dictatorship, no. It's because the Syrian regime refuses to follow Western orders and has always refused to follow Western orders. That's why they want to bring them down.
There are mixed signals, though, aren't there, from Assad? He seems to suggest that he will step down, then he won't. What do you think will happen there?
No, as far as I know, he has no intention of stepping down. There are people who fly kites in the Western media. Russia's about to change its position, China's about to change its position, Assad's about to get on a plane. This is, I think, largely disinformation. But undoubtedly the Syrian regime has a massive problem. It has a democratic deficit in its country. It is a dictatorship. The era of dictatorship must be coming to an end in the Arab world, and should come to an end, should have long ago come to an end. But there are many dictatorships in the Arab world who are not being targeted by this international conspiracy, indeed are a vital component, part of the conspiracy. Mrs. Clinton declared the Friends of Democratic Syria, but within 3 days even she had realized the risibility of that moniker, because its core included Saudi Arabia and Qatar, where there is no democracy of any kind whatsoever.
You mentioned these ethnic groups that are jostling for position in Syria. Do you predict a full-scale slide into civil war? And if so, do you think that Britain will be gunning to get involved?
Well, I think there already is a civil war in Syria. The massacres that are taking place are almost entirely demarcated by sectarian division. If you like, the dichotomy that exists in the country is not just between those who are with the regime or against the regime, though that exists, but between different ethnic and confessional groups. And that's a powder keg, if ever you wanted to find one. That's why I said last night to a British Foreign Office minister, what are you doing in Syria? Have you any idea of the virtual nuclear explosion in a critical area that you are helping to bring about? Did you learn nothing from Afghanistan? Did you learn nothing from flying Osama bin Laden to Afghanistan to fight the Red Army? This is even more dangerous because it has, of course, frontier with Israel. It's on the shores of the Mediterranean, so close to Europe itself, and it is part of, if you wanted to draw it that way, an arc involving Iran, Iraq with its big Shia majority, the Syrian government, and the people who support it, and of course the Shiite national resistance movement in Lebanon, Hezbollah. That's a very powerful arc with a lot of firepower. And one of the characteristics of Shiism, which the Foreign Office Minister that I talked to last night appeared oblivious to, was that Shiites are quite ready to fight to the death.
And what role do you think Iran should play in bringing peace to Syria?
Well, Iran is a critical component in the region as a whole. It's critical in Iraq. It could end in an afternoon all remaining traces of Western occupation of Iraq in an afternoon if they gave the word to do so. And of course you cannot talk about the future of the region without bringing Iran into it. And Russia and Kofi Annan are both correct in saying that Iran is indispensable in any solution to this. The only possible solution is the Kofi Annan plan, which is supported by everybody in the world except the people whose plan it ostensibly is. The United Nations is supporting it as the rope supports the hanging man. The Arab League that appointed Kofi Annan in the first place is busily supplying weapons to the rebels to undo it. But any sensible person in the world wants the plan to succeed. And the plan is to, by dialogue and transition, end dictatorship in Syria without having to spill an ocean of blood in order to do it, and destabilize the region and therefore the world.
George Galloway, thank you very much.
Thank you.